The aircraft hummed softly, alive with the low murmur of passengers settling in for their flight. Travelers shuffled through the aisle, stowing bags and finding their seats, chatting quietly amongst themselves. Near the center row stood a slender girl no more than 12 years old, her slight frame almost swallowed up by the oversized backpack and small suitcase she carried. Her wide, anxious eyes darted around nervously as she tried to lift the suitcase into the overhead compartment. Standing on tiptoe, she stretched upward, her delicate arms trembling under the suitcase's modest weight. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the compartment repeatedly, each time coming just shy of pushing the bag fully inside. The suitcase slipped slightly, causing her to inhale sharply, nearly losing her balance. Taking a shaky breath, she tried again, her small hands gripping tighter as embarrassment began to creep into her expression. A few passengers nearby glanced her way, but none offered assistance. Instead, they merely watched passively, faces blank or mildly irritated, eager to move past and settle into their seats. Her struggle seemed invisible to them, just another minor inconvenience in a long day of travel. Just then, hurried footsteps approached quickly down the aisle. A flight attendant, a woman around 30 with tightly pulled back hair and a crisp, immaculate uniform, appeared behind the girl. Her mouth was set in a thin line of annoyance, eyes narrowed impatiently as she assessed the situation. Without hesitation or gentleness, the attendant spoke sharply, her voice slicing through the quiet murmur of passengers like a blade. "Come on, hurry up, what is wrong with you? Why are you so clumsy?" the attendant snapped loudly. "You're holding everyone up. Stop causing trouble." The sudden harshness startled the girl profoundly. Her body jerked in surprise, her fingers instantly losing their precarious grip on the suitcase handle. It slipped from her trembling hands, crashing down onto the cabin floor with a loud thud, contents shifting audibly inside. The noise echoed sharply through the cabin, instantly drawing the attention of nearly everyone nearby. Laughter erupted spontaneously from several passengers who had witnessed the scene, amusement shining cruelly in their eyes as they exchanged mocking looks. One woman chuckled softly behind her hand, whispering something to her companion, while another older man openly shook his head, smirking with disdain. The humiliating chorus of laughter intensified the young girl's panic, sending her heartbeat racing and causing her cheeks to flush scarlet with shame. The attendant stared down at her coldly, making no move to help, her expression clearly conveying irritation rather than concern. "Now look what you've done," she said bitterly, her voice dripping with impatience. "Pick it up quickly. People are waiting." Frozen momentarily, the girl's vision blurred as tears began pooling in her eyes. Every instinct in her small body screamed at her to run, to escape the painful ridicule and the sting of the attendant's harsh words, but there was nowhere to go. She swallowed hard, fighting desperately to contain the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. Determined not to show weakness, yet feeling utterly powerless and exposed under the critical gazes of passengers and crew, slowly, with trembling hands, she bent down to retrieve the suitcase, trying desperately to keep her composure despite the humiliation swelling in her chest. Her thin shoulders shook slightly, betrayed by a quiet sob that slipped out before she could stop it. A younger passenger, perhaps in his early 20s, seated a few rows back, began to rise, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. But before he could say anything, the attendant shot him a sharp, authoritative glance. "Sir, please remain seated," she commanded coldly. Her tone carried an unmistakable warning, discouraging any interference or kindness. The passenger hesitated, looking conflicted, but ultimately lowering himself back into his seat reluctantly. The girl's fingers fumbled clumsily over the suitcase, struggling to grasp the handle as embarrassment continued to paralyze her. Her breath came quick and shallow, panic tightening her chest as the laughter faded into whispers of judgment and impatience. "What a waste of everyone's time," muttered an elderly passenger sitting directly across from the girl, her voice intentionally audible. "If you can't handle your luggage, you shouldn't be traveling alone." Those words pierced even deeper, adding fuel to the quiet cruelty rippling through the cabin. The girl's lower lip quivered, and she pressed her eyes shut for a brief, painful moment, drawing on whatever small bit of courage remained. Finally, she managed to grasp the suitcase firmly, clutching it protectively against her chest, as though it might shield her from further ridicule. But even as she straightened back up, her humiliation wasn't over. The flight attendant sighed loudly in irritation, rolling her eyes in exaggerated frustration. "Just put it under the seat in front of you, since you're clearly not capable of using the overhead compartment," she ordered coldly. Without waiting for the girl's response, the attendant turned abruptly, swiftly walking away down the aisle, attending to other passengers with polite smiles and gentle words. A sharp contrast that intensified the unfairness of the girl's ordeal. Still standing in the aisle, alone and humiliated, the young girl felt invisible yet painfully exposed at the same time. Her eyes dropped toward the carpeted floor, avoiding any further mocking gazes. Her small frame shook silently as she carefully moved toward her seat, suitcase clutched tightly, every step feeling like an eternity. Nearby passengers returned to their activities, losing interest in the girl, indifferent to the emotional scar they'd left behind. The cruel laughter had ceased, replaced once more by indifferent murmurs and casual conversations, the girl and her pain now irrelevant. Yet, unknown to anyone aboard, this seemingly isolated moment of injustice had sparked something far larger. The harsh actions of the flight attendant and passengers were about to set off a chain reaction, revealing a shocking truth no one could foresee. As the girl quietly sank into her seat, face turned toward the window to hide her tears, she had no idea that the events soon to unfold would not only confront the cruel behavior she'd endured, but also leave every person aboard this plane shaken, forced to reckon with the consequences of their indifference. Because the truth was, this wasn't just another child they'd mistreated. This quiet, frightened girl was someone far more significant than anyone realized. And very soon, the world aboard this flight would learn just how deeply they'd underestimated her, and the powerful consequences awaiting their cruelty. From his seat a few rows behind, the girl's father watched the humiliating scene unfold with a tightening sensation in his chest. His heart twisted painfully as he observed the tears welling up in his daughter's eyes, the tremble in her small shoulders betraying her emotional turmoil. The laughter and mocking whispers felt sharp, piercing not just the girl's dignity, but his heart as well. For a moment he remained in his seat, his jaw clenched tightly, a storm of anger and sadness swirling silently inside him. He knew confrontation wasn't ideal, especially on a crowded flight. But how could he remain silent as his child endured such unnecessary cruelty? It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Taking a deep breath, he stood slowly, adjusting his jacket and moving carefully through the narrow aisle toward his daughter. He stepped calmly yet purposefully, determination clear in his measured movements. Passengers noticed him, their gazes shifting from mild curiosity to quiet anticipation. They sensed an impending confrontation, and the low hum of conversation momentarily ceased, replaced by tense silence. The girl still sat trembling in her seat, her small suitcase clutched protectively in her lap, head bowed to hide her tear-streaked face. Approaching the flight attendant who was standing nearby assisting another passenger with exaggerated warmth, the father paused briefly, gathering his composure before addressing her. "Excuse me," he spoke quietly but firmly, his voice carrying an air of polite authority that subtly demanded attention. The flight attendant, busy smiling warmly at an elderly passenger while assisting her with her luggage, turned sharply at the interruption, her eyes narrowing in instant irritation. Her pleasant demeanor disappeared instantly, replaced by the same cold expression she'd previously directed at the girl. "Yes," she replied curtly, her tone sharp, already brimming with impatience, as though his very presence inconvenienced her. Remaining composed, the father spoke evenly, deliberately lowering his voice to avoid attracting more unnecessary attention, despite knowing everyone nearby was already watching intently. "I saw what happened just now," he began gently, striving for calm and reason. "I understand you're under pressure, but could you please be a bit gentler when addressing my daughter? She's very young and easily frightened." His request was polite, understated, devoid of aggression or accusation, yet everyone around them sensed its seriousness. Passengers held their breath, the moment suspended in delicate tension as all eyes shifted expectantly toward the flight attendant. The woman's eyes flashed with sudden defensiveness, her mouth pressing into a thin line of visible displeasure. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his calm gaze with barely concealed contempt, as though deeply offended by the gentle reprimand. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, her mind clearly weighing her response before deciding not on apology or understanding, but instead on sharp, deliberate cruelty. "If you taught your child some manners, sir," she retorted acidly, voice dripping with sarcasm, "perhaps I wouldn't have to discipline her myself. Clearly, she's never learned proper behavior at home." Her words landed like a physical blow, sharp and intentionally wounding. A collective gasp rippled quietly among nearby passengers, some shifting uncomfortably, others exchanging glances of disbelief. The injustice of the statement was glaring, yet the attendant remained defiantly unapologetic, her eyes challenging, daring him to respond further. The father stood utterly still for a moment, his body tensing slightly beneath the weight of her brazen disrespect. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, his expression carefully neutral even as anger flared deep inside his chest. Confrontation now, he knew, would only exacerbate the humiliation for his daughter. He glanced back briefly toward her seat, seeing her shoulders shaking gently, tears silently staining her flushed cheeks. He swallowed hard, forcing back a wave of protective anger. Fighting openly would do nothing except escalate the situation. Instead, he gave a slight, controlled nod, indicating he'd heard her clearly, then turned away slowly, returning to his seat with quiet dignity. As he moved away, the attendant audibly sighed, rolling her eyes with exaggerated impatience, as though relieved that such an inconvenience was finally out of her sight. Without missing a beat, she spun immediately toward the elderly passenger she had been helping earlier, her entire demeanor shifting back to exaggerated warmth and politeness. "Now, Mrs. Thompson," she cooed gently, voice soft, almost affectionate, her previous hostility seemingly vanished in an instant. "Can I help you with anything else today? Perhaps a blanket or a pillow to make you more comfortable?" The elderly passenger smiled gratefully, nodding appreciatively at the sudden, attentive care. "You're too kind, dear," she murmured, clearly unaware or uninterested in the stark contrast between the attendant's behaviors just moments before. Other passengers, however, weren't blind to this blatant favoritism. Several shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the young girl and her father with growing unease. The unfairness was stark, disturbing even those who had previously laughed or ignored the incident. Yet, despite their discomfort, no one spoke up or intervened. A heavy silence settled over the cabin, punctuated only by quiet murmurs and exchanged glances. Everyone aware they had witnessed something deeply unjust, yet uncertain how or if they should respond. The girl's father settled back into his seat, his face expressionless, eyes darkened by quiet fury and helpless sadness. He reached over, gently placing a reassuring hand on his daughter's trembling shoulder. She turned slightly toward him, eyes swollen, tears still brimming silently, her expression filled with shame and confusion. "It's all right," he whispered softly, offering a comforting smile despite the turmoil raging quietly within him. "I promise it will be all right." Yet deep down, beneath his composed exterior, anger simmered fiercely. He replayed the attendant's words again and again, each repetition sharpening his resolve. This wasn't simply about his daughter anymore. It was about basic decency, respect, and justice. How could someone entrusted to care for passengers behave with such callousness? How could such cruelty be tolerated or excused? A grim determination settled deep inside him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He would ensure the attendant faced real accountability, that this injustice didn't simply fade quietly away, forgotten among the clouds. As the aircraft engines hummed louder, preparing for takeoff, the father turned his gaze toward the window, eyes narrowing slightly as he considered his next move. The attendant may have felt secure in her momentary arrogance, confident in her power over passengers and situations, but she had made one critical mistake today. She had underestimated the quiet strength of a father determined to protect his child and defend what was right. And soon, very soon, she would understand just how severe the consequences of her disrespect would be. The plane ascended steadily into the sky, engines humming gently beneath the passengers' feet. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling a sense of calm to most aboard, yet for the young girl and her father, the flight had already become unbearably tense. The humiliating exchange with the attendant still hung heavily in the air, palpable, uncomfortable, and utterly unresolved. Throughout the flight, the attendant's hostility did not diminish. If anything, it grew more pronounced. Each time she passed their seats, she deliberately averted her gaze, her expression locked in cool indifference, as though the father and daughter no longer existed. While the other passengers received gentle smiles, courteous assistance, and polite inquiries about their comfort, the girl and her father received only silence, coldness, and disdain. The girl, still visibly shaken, had retreated deep into herself. Her eyes remained downcast, studying her tightly clasped hands as though they might hold answers or comfort she couldn't find elsewhere. Occasionally, she would steal quick, nervous glances around, as if hoping her invisibility would shield her from further humiliation. Yet every passing moment felt like a prolonged punishment, her small figure pressed anxiously into her seat, a portrait of vulnerability and discomfort. An hour into the flight, she quietly whispered to her father, voice hesitant and barely audible, "Dad, I'm thirsty. Could I have some water?" Her father nodded softly, managing a reassuring smile despite the bitter frustration boiling beneath the surface. He gently pressed the call button above their seats, the soft chimes signaling their request to the cabin crew. Within moments, the same flight attendant approached down the aisle, serving refreshments generously and cheerfully to other passengers, chatting warmly and exchanging pleasantries as she went. However, as she neared their row, she pointedly shifted her gaze away, passing by as though oblivious to their clearly illuminated request light. "Excuse me," the father said politely, raising his voice slightly to catch her attention as she deliberately moved past. The attendant paused, irritation flickering across her face, before she masked it with practiced indifference, turning slowly toward him. "Yes," she responded tersely, her voice dripping with barely concealed annoyance. "My daughter is thirsty," he replied calmly, restraining the anger building within him. "Could we have a cup of water, please?" The attendant hesitated deliberately, her eyes lingering briefly on the young girl before she gave a tight, dismissive smile that didn't reach her cold gaze. "We'll be doing a full beverage service later," she responded curtly, clearly unwilling to extend even basic courtesy. "You'll have to wait until then." Before he could reply, she swiftly turned away, resuming her duties with exaggerated warmth for other passengers, clearly signaling her disregard. Nearby, a young woman seated across the aisle had observed the entire exchange, clearly unsettled by the attendant's unnecessary harshness. Disturbed by the unfair treatment and visibly troubled, she leaned slightly forward, trying to catch the attendant's attention as she returned up the aisle moments later. "Excuse me," the woman began hesitantly, her voice gentle yet firm, tinged with nervousness. "That little girl seems very upset and thirsty. Surely you could make a quick exception and bring her some water." The flight attendant's demeanor changed instantly. Her posture straightened defensively, eyes flashing dangerously as she turned sharply toward the passenger. Her voice lowered, icy and authoritative, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "We have specific protocols," she snapped coldly, eyes narrowing sharply as she stared directly at the well-meaning passenger, intimidatingly firm. "Passenger requests must follow crew instructions. Please refrain from interfering with our established procedures." The young woman recoiled slightly, clearly taken aback by the sudden hostility, her face coloring in embarrassment at having been publicly reprimanded. Murmuring a quiet apology, she sank back into her seat, shoulders hunched, clearly distressed but too intimidated to speak further. Other nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances, visibly uncomfortable yet unwilling or unable to intervene. The attendant had effectively silenced any further potential acts of kindness or solidarity, isolating the girl and her father even further in their quiet misery. The young girl, witnessing this exchange, shrank even further into her seat, her eyes shimmering with fresh tears born of frustration and humiliation. The injustice was palpable now, not just toward herself and her father, but toward anyone who dared challenge the attendant's cruel authority. Her father, jaw tightly clenched, felt a powerful wave of anger swell within him, restrained only by his determination not to worsen his daughter's distress. He placed a gentle, protective hand on her small shoulder, squeezing gently in quiet reassurance. Despite feeling powerless in that moment to shield her from such unnecessary cruelty. Around them, the uncomfortable tension in the cabin grew thicker. Passengers shifted uneasily, some clearly disturbed yet uncertain about how to respond. The whispered conversations and sideways glances hinted at growing discomfort, yet a sense of helplessness prevented meaningful intervention. Everyone aboard seemed aware of the injustice unfolding before them, yet immobilized by fear of confrontation or reprisal. As the attendant continued her rounds, now pointedly ignoring both father and daughter, the father felt a quiet resolve forming within him. He could no longer tolerate such blatant cruelty, not merely out of protective instinct for his daughter, but out of basic human decency. He understood clearly now that the attendant's hostility had gone far beyond mere irritation. It was a deliberate, intentional act of humiliation and cruelty, leveraging her position to harm those she perceived as vulnerable. A bitter, quiet fury settled inside him. The attendant's position of temporary power aboard this plane had blinded her to a critical truth. Her cruelty would not go unnoticed or unanswered. The father's patience was not weakness, it was a careful, calculated calm, and beneath it lay a profound determination to seek justice once this plane touched down. He silently observed her exaggerated kindness toward others, contrasted sharply against her relentless hostility toward himself and his daughter, committing each instance clearly to memory. Her arrogance had made her careless, unaware she had chosen the wrong target for her spite. Beside him, his daughter had fallen into a quiet, exhausted silence. Her head leaned softly against his shoulder, eyes closed in an effort to block out the cruelty surrounding her. He wrapped an arm protectively around her, comforting her as best he could in this constrained moment. But beneath the tenderness of his embrace, his resolve hardened into absolute certainty. This injustice would not stand unanswered. The attendant had unknowingly ignited something powerful within him, an unyielding determination to hold her accountable no matter the cost. And soon, very soon, she would learn the gravity of her mistake. Midway through the flight, the tension aboard had become almost unbearable. The cabin remained heavy with unspoken frustration, uncomfortable silence lingering in the air. Passengers discreetly watched the girl and her father, noticing the quiet suffering etched on their faces, yet unsure how, or if, to intervene. Quietly, seated beside his daughter, Richard Bennett felt his phone vibrate softly in his pocket. He reached for it discreetly, glancing quickly at the illuminated screen. The message was brief, professional, and urgent. Sir, everything is prepared as per your instructions, awaiting your next step. Reading the message, Richard felt a renewed sense of determination surge within him. He had carefully restrained himself throughout the flight, keenly aware that any direct confrontation might only further distress his already upset daughter. Yet, as the attendant's deliberate cruelty escalated, his patience had finally reached its limit. Taking a deep breath, Richard stood decisively. He straightened his jacket calmly, fixing the cuffs of his sleeves, a gesture of composed authority. Passengers nearby instantly sensed the change, their eyes turning cautiously toward him, anticipating something significant was about to unfold. With firm, measured steps, he moved down the aisle toward the galley area where the flight attendant was serving refreshments, continuing to display exaggerated warmth towards select passengers while pointedly ignoring his daughter. The attendant glanced up, irritation immediately crossing her features upon seeing him approach. "Excuse me?" Richard stated, quietly yet clearly, his tone unmistakably firm, carrying an authority that refused dismissal. "Could I have a moment of your time?" The attendant hesitated visibly, annoyance and impatience evident in her posture. She glanced around briefly, clearly displeased by the interruption but aware other passengers were watching closely. She forced a strained smile, eyes cold and unfriendly. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked curtly, not bothering to conceal her disdain. "Yes," Richard replied evenly, maintaining absolute composure despite his underlying fury. "I'd appreciate speaking with you privately." The quiet urgency and unmistakable authority in his voice left no room for refusal. With a reluctant nod, she moved slightly aside, stepping back into the galley space, out of direct view of most passengers, but still within clear earshot. Once they were slightly apart, she folded her arms defensively, eyes narrowed in guarded hostility. "What exactly is it?" she demanded tersely, making no attempt to disguise her irritation. Without a word, Richard reached slowly into his jacket pocket, calmly removing a sleek business card elegantly embossed with the unmistakable logo of Blue Skies Airlines. He handed it to her deliberately, watching her expression carefully as she accepted it with mild confusion. Her eyes moved quickly over the card, widening gradually with shock as realization dawned. Her face paled visibly, her previously defiant expression collapsing into stunned disbelief. Her hands began trembling slightly as she reread the name and title clearly printed. Richard Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, Blue Skies Airlines. Before she could speak, Richard's voice broke the heavy silence. Firm, clear, and unwavering, ringing with the unmistakable weight of authority. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he said coldly, eyes locking onto hers with intense clarity. "I am Richard Bennett, CEO of Blue Skies Airlines. The child you've spent this entire flight humiliating and mistreating is my daughter." The attendant's face drained entirely of color, her mouth opening soundlessly as she desperately struggled to form words. Her confidence evaporated in an instant, replaced by panic and fear. Oh my goodness, Mr. Bennett, I had no idea she was your daughter," she stammered frantically, voice shaking, eyes darting anxiously around the galley as if seeking escape. Richard's response was swift, sharp, and unyielding, deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers to clearly overhear every syllable. "Frankly, who my daughter is should never matter," he declared coldly, each word delivered with steely precision. "Every passenger aboard this airline deserves equal dignity and respect, qualities you've utterly failed to demonstrate today." Passengers nearby, previously hesitant, now openly turned toward the confrontation, murmurs of surprise rippling through the cabin. Eyes widened, heads craned, the truth of the attendant's earlier behavior suddenly illuminated starkly by Richard's bold revelation. A collective sense of shock and anticipation filled the air, many nodding subtly in agreement with his words, the weight of justice becoming clear. Jacques continued, unflinching, his voice resonating powerfully. "As CEO, I will never tolerate such blatant cruelty and disregard toward any passenger aboard our flights. Your actions today were not only unprofessional, they were inhumane. You will be held fully accountable, and I assure you this incident will be addressed swiftly and decisively upon landing." The attendant's breathing quickened visibly, panic spreading across her features as she understood the full gravity of her mistake. Her eyes darted desperately, searching the faces of surrounding passengers for sympathy or support, but finding none, only cold, silent judgment. Passengers who had previously remained silent now openly voiced quiet support for Richard's firm stance, some nodding approvingly, others whispering their agreement. The collective atmosphere aboard shifted dramatically from passive unease to active solidarity, fueled by the powerful revelation of Richard's identity and unwavering resolve. Richard paused briefly, allowing his words to resonate deeply through the cabin. Then, stepping closer, voice lowered but still audible enough for passengers to hear clearly, he concluded firmly, "Let me make one thing perfectly clear. The safety, comfort, and dignity of every passenger aboard this airline are my personal responsibility, and I promise you, I will ensure no passenger ever endures what my daughter suffered today again. You have my word." With those final decisive words, Richard turned deliberately, leaving the flight attendant standing, shaken, humiliated, and utterly defeated in the galley. He walked back toward his seat, passing rows of passengers who watched him now with quiet admiration and respect. As he returned to his daughter's side, he placed a reassuring hand gently upon her shoulder. She glanced up cautiously, her expression still uncertain but slightly hopeful, sensing something important had shifted. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart," Richard whispered softly, smiling warmly at her despite the intense emotions still coursing through him. "No one will ever treat you or anyone else like that again. Not aboard my airline." She leaned into him slightly, visibly comforted by his presence and quiet determination. Around them, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed entirely, now charged with anticipation, empowerment, and quiet celebration of justice finally delivered. Richard Bennett had quietly yet unmistakably changed everything. And every passenger aboard this flight knew clearly that they had witnessed not just a father's protective wrath, but a leader's uncompromising stand against injustice. As the plane touched down gently on the runway, passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark. Yet, beneath the typical bustle and movement was a palpable tension, an eager anticipation that went beyond the routine landing procedure. Passengers exchanged meaningful glances, knowing that the confrontation aboard the aircraft was far from over. They sensed the simmering anger beneath the calm exterior of Richard Bennett, the CEO whose quiet resolve promised swift and uncompromising justice. Immediately upon landing, Richard reached once again for his phone, tapping out a concise, authoritative message to his senior management team waiting at the terminal. His words were simple, decisive, and carried immense weight. "Meet me at the gate immediately. We have a serious issue to resolve." Within moments, as passengers began to file slowly from the plane, Richard and his daughter waited patiently, allowing others to exit ahead of them. The young girl remained close by his side, her small hand held reassuringly in his, eyes wide with nervousness but also hopeful trust. The gentle pressure of his hand assured her that the cruelty she'd endured would soon be made right. Outside the airplane door, at the bustling terminal gate, a group of senior executives and managers from Blue Skies Airlines stood waiting anxiously, clearly alerted and prepared by Richard's earlier message. Their professional suits and tense expressions drew immediate attention from passengers exiting the aircraft, murmurs rippling through the crowd as curiosity mounted. Richard finally emerged from the plane, his presence instantly commanding attention and respect. Holding his daughter's hand protectively, he approached his waiting team, acknowledging them briefly but keeping his expression gravely serious. "Where is the flight attendant who served on this flight?" Richard asked firmly, his voice calm yet authoritative, deliberately audible to passengers gathered nearby. At that moment, the attendant emerged reluctantly from the aircraft, visibly shaken and clearly aware of the impending confrontation. Her face was pale, hands trembling slightly. The arrogance and disdain she'd displayed aboard the flight now replaced by visible anxiety and fear. She hesitated briefly, eyes darting nervously toward Richard and the assembled executives, then quickly downward to avoid direct eye contact. "Step forward, please," Richard commanded clearly, his voice unyielding. The attendant obeyed hesitantly, stepping slowly into full view, painfully aware of the passengers around her watching intently. Richard paused a moment, gathering his thoughts, allowing silence to amplify the gravity of what he was about to announce. When he finally spoke, his voice resonated powerfully, carrying through the busy terminal clearly and distinctly. "As CEO of Blue Skies Airlines, I have always emphasized one core principle. Every passenger deserves dignity and respect, without exception. Unfortunately, aboard today's flight, this fundamental standard was not just compromised, it was deliberately disregarded." Passengers gathered around paused their movements entirely, forming an impromptu audience, eyes fixed on Richard's solemn expression. A deep silence enveloped the gate area as everyone waited for him to continue, sensing the seriousness of this unprecedented public rebuke. Richard turned directly toward the trembling attendant, his gaze unwaveringly firm and authoritative. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from your duties," he stated bluntly, each word delivered clearly and unmistakably. "Hand over your company badge now, right here, in front of these passengers and your colleagues." Stunned, the attendant's eyes widened in shock and humiliation. Reluctantly, hands shaking uncontrollably, she removed her airline badge, her symbol of authority and position, and passed it to Richard's waiting hand. The symbolic gesture carried profound meaning, stripping her publicly of her power and privileges. Richard continued relentlessly, his voice firm yet deeply fair. "You will publicly apologize, here and now, to my daughter and myself, and to every passenger aboard that flight who witnessed your unacceptable behavior. Acknowledge clearly the harm you have caused." Tears welled in the attendant's eyes as she stumbled forward, voice trembling as she turned toward the young girl standing quietly beside her father. I deeply apologize for my actions. I was wrong and unprofessional. I'm so sorry for causing you pain and humiliation." Her voice broke slightly, clearly ashamed and humiliated by the public exposure of her cruelty. The young girl nodded quietly, her gaze steady, finding quiet strength beside her father's reassuring presence. Yet Richard wasn't finished. He turned back toward the assembled executives, ensuring the crowd clearly heard his next words. "Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate internal investigation to thoroughly examine all previous conduct of cabin crew on our flights. If any similar instances of disrespect or discrimination are discovered, those responsible will be terminated immediately. I will personally ensure this airline is a place where such behavior has absolutely no place." A ripple of approval spread through the gathered passengers, many nodding quietly, others murmuring their support and agreement. The sense of justice and accountability was tangible, satisfying the audience's deep-seated desire for fairness. Turning again toward the flight attendant, Richard's voice hardened slightly, eyes narrowing with uncompromising resolve. "Understand this clearly. Your apology today does not erase the damage you caused. If our investigation reveals any prior misconduct or similar incidents involving you, your employment will be terminated immediately, without further consideration or appeal." Desperation flashed across the attendant's face, tears streaming freely now as she pleaded, voice shaking. "Please, Mr. Bennett, I beg your forgiveness. I never intended to—" Richard cut her off decisively, his voice calm yet coldly uncompromising. "You treated my daughter, a child entrusted to your care, as if she deserved no respect or compassion. Today, you will experience firsthand how it feels to be stripped of dignity. Consider this your lesson in humanity." The attendant fell silent, eyes lowered in defeat, finally understanding the full weight and finality of her actions. Richard turned quietly toward the passengers gathered around, addressing them directly, voice softened slightly with sincerity and resolve. "Every passenger aboard Blue Skies Airlines deserves dignity, respect, and kindness, without exception. I promise to uphold that standard rigorously. Today, we confront injustice head-on and reaffirm our commitment to ensuring it never happens again." His words resonated powerfully throughout the terminal. Passengers nodded appreciatively, murmured support, and expressed their gratitude openly, feeling deeply reassured by Richard's unwavering integrity and justice. With calm dignity, Richard gently took his daughter's hand again, offering her a reassuring smile filled with warmth and pride. "Let's go home, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice comforting, secure in the knowledge that the injustice she'd suffered had been addressed decisively. Around them, passengers dispersed slowly, inspired and reassured by the powerful example Richard Bennett had set that day. His decisive action and moral clarity had restored dignity, affirmed justice, and shown everyone aboard that cruelty and injustice would never be tolerated, especially aboard his airline. As the gathered crowd at the airport terminal began to disperse slowly, still whispering appreciatively about the powerful demonstration of justice they'd just witnessed, Richard Bennett gently guided his daughter to a quieter corner away from the bustling passengers. The heavy emotional toll of the day's events was visible in her small face, her eyes still glistening with remnants of tears, her tiny shoulders still tense from the lingering embarrassment and trauma she'd endured. Seeing her this way, Richard felt a deep ache in his heart. Carefully and tenderly, he knelt down on one knee before her, placing himself at her eye level so she could clearly see the sincerity and love radiating from his face. Her large eyes looked directly into his, filled with questions and lingering confusion about everything she'd experienced that day. Softly, he reached out and gently held both of her small hands in his larger ones. The airport noise and bustle seemed to fade into the background, leaving only this intimate moment between father and daughter, a quiet haven amidst the chaos. "Honey," Richard began gently, his voice filled with warmth and reassurance, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. What happened today wasn't your fault. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Nothing at all." Her bottom lip trembled slightly, tears threatening once again to spill down her cheeks as she finally allowed herself to release the emotional burden she'd carried silently throughout the flight. She nodded slowly, blinking away tears, clinging desperately to her father's comforting words. Richard continued softly, his voice gentle yet filled with profound wisdom. "But today, you learned something important. A lesson that unfortunately we all must learn sooner or later. Sometimes the world isn't fair. Sometimes people may treat you wrongly or unfairly even though you've done nothing to deserve it." He paused briefly, allowing those words to resonate deeply within her. She watched him intently, clearly absorbing the depth of his words, her innocent eyes seeking understanding and comfort. "However," Richard continued, voice strengthening with quiet conviction, "it's precisely in moments like these, moments when unfairness strikes, that we must find the courage inside ourselves to stand firm. It's easy to be kind when everyone else is kind, but true strength comes when you defend dignity, respect, and kindness, even when others have forgotten those values." He listened carefully, her small face gradually reflecting a new understanding, a maturity slowly blossoming through her previously fearful expression. She squeezed his hands tighter, drawing strength from his comforting presence and unwavering conviction. Richard gently reached forward, wiping away a lingering tear from her cheek with his thumb, a small, affectionate gesture filled with fatherly tenderness. "Remember," he continued earnestly, his voice strong yet tender, "each of us deserves dignity, kindness, and respect. No matter who we are, no matter where we come from, never allow anyone to convince you otherwise. And when you see others being treated unfairly, never be afraid to stand up for them, to speak out, because your voice matters, your strength matters, and it can change everything." The little girl's eyes brightened gradually, visibly comforted by her father's sincere words. Slowly, a tentative smile began to form on her lips, a smile filled not only with relief, but a newfound sense of pride in her father's courage and wisdom. The pain she'd experienced earlier seemed to fade, replaced instead by a quiet strength and determination, reflecting clearly in her young eyes. "I understand, Dad," she whispered softly, her voice filled with renewed confidence. "I promise I'll always stand up for what's right, just like you did today." Her heartfelt words filled Richard's chest with warmth and pride. He gently drew her into his embrace, holding her tightly as if to shield her from ever experiencing such pain again, knowing that despite his best intentions, life would inevitably present her with more challenges. Yet in this moment, he felt assured that she possessed the strength, courage, and resilience to face anything that might come her way. Nearby, a small group of passengers who had witnessed the entire exchange had quietly gathered, moved deeply by the profound and intimate conversation they'd overheard. They approached carefully, respectfully keeping a small distance, their faces reflecting genuine admiration and appreciation. One elderly gentleman stepped forward, offering Richard a sincere, respectful nod. "Sir," he began gently, clearly moved, "I just wanted to say how deeply impressed I am by your actions today. Your courage, integrity, and the way you defended your daughter and the dignity of every passenger is truly inspiring." Other passengers nearby nodded in agreement, murmuring their support and admiration, eager to express their gratitude openly. A young woman who had previously attempted to defend the girl aboard the plane stepped forward hesitantly, her voice slightly shy yet filled with quiet conviction. "I was so angry when I saw the attendant treat your daughter so terribly. Thank you for standing up, not just for your child but for all of us who were silently feeling powerless. You've reminded everyone here what real leadership looks like." Richard rose slowly to his feet, humbled by their heartfelt words, gently keeping his hand protectively around his daughter's shoulders as she stood proudly beside him. He offered the passengers gathered a modest, sincere smile, deeply grateful for their support and acknowledgement. "I appreciate your kindness very much," Richard replied quietly, his voice humble yet strong. "But what happened today isn't about me. It's about basic human decency, fairness, and respect. It's our collective responsibility to ensure no one experiences such cruelty or injustice. I'm simply grateful I could remind us all of what matters most." A warm, respectful applause rippled gently through the crowd, an expression of collective gratitude and renewed commitment to the values Richard had powerfully exemplified. The heartfelt recognition visibly moved him, but his greatest pride remained quietly at his side. The young daughter who now stood taller, braver, and more certain of herself than ever before. As the passengers slowly dispersed, each reflecting deeply on the profound lesson they'd witnessed, Richard gently squeezed his daughter's shoulder once more, whispering softly with quiet pride, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Never forget the strength inside you, and never forget the power of your voice." She looked up at him, eyes shining brightly with newfound courage, her small hand gripping his tightly. "I won't, Dad," she said firmly, smiling warmly up at him. "I'll always remember." And at that moment, amidst the bustling airport terminal, father and daughter stood united in quiet, profound strength, knowing that today they'd shared a lesson neither would ever forget. 1 week later, a decisive statement appeared prominently on the official Blue Skies Airlines website. signed personally by CEO Richard Bennett. It was clear, unambiguous, and unmistakably strong in its intent, reflecting the profound lessons and experiences of the previous days. At Blue Skies Airlines, every passenger is valued and deserves absolute dignity and respect. We deeply regret the incident that recently occurred aboard one of our flights, an incident that profoundly goes against our foundational values as a company. In response, we are immediately taking decisive and comprehensive steps to ensure such behavior never occurs again. Beneath the bold headline were clearly outlined actions demonstrating the company's commitment. Zero-tolerance policy. From this moment forward, Blue Skies Airlines will enforce a strict, zero-tolerance stance toward discrimination, disrespect, or inappropriate treatment of any passenger or employee. Violations of this policy will result in immediate disciplinary action, up to and including dismissal. Mandatory respect and professional ethics training. All Blue Skies Airlines personnel, from cabin crew to ground staff, will participate in compulsory, intensive training sessions emphasizing dignity, respect, empathy, and professional ethics. These sessions will be regularly refreshed to ensure ongoing adherence to our core values. Passenger Direct Hotline. A dedicated confidential hotline has been established for passengers to report any concerns, incidents, or behavior that contradicts our high standards. Every reported case will be reviewed personally by senior management, ensuring transparency, accountability, and swift corrective action. The statement ended with a sincere personal commitment from Richard Bennett himself. As CEO, I promise our passengers and our employees that respect, kindness, and dignity are not negotiable. They are fundamental to our mission, our values, and our identity. Today, Blue Skies Airlines renews its commitment to serve every passenger with excellence, compassion, and fairness. Within hours, the powerful statement drew widespread attention, shared extensively across social media and major news outlets. Public response was overwhelmingly positive, resonating deeply with thousands who applauded the airline's transparent acknowledgement of wrongdoing, swift corrective measures, and bold recommitment to ethical standards. Customers voiced strong approval, sharing their support and pledging continued loyalty. Many posted online testimonials praising the airline's courageous leadership, decisive action, and willingness to learn from past mistakes. Bookings surged, customer satisfaction ratings reached record highs, and the Blue Skies brand became synonymous with responsibility, integrity, and genuine empathy. To underscore Inside the sleek corporate headquarters of Blue Skies Airlines, the former flight attendant whose behavior sparked the controversy walked slowly down a silent corridor. Her badge had already been revoked days before, but today her dismissal was finalized officially. She clutched a simple cardboard box containing her belongings, her expression blank and defeated, shoulders slumped under the weight of her irreversible mistake. Colleagues passed by in quiet, uneasy silence, deliberately avoiding eye contact, their discomfort palpable. She knew clearly that she'd forfeited far more than just her job. She had lost respect, trust, and dignity. Ironically, the very things she'd callously stripped from a young girl aboard a flight just 1 week prior. As she stepped outside into the glaring sunlight, reality fully settled upon her. Her actions had consequences that reached far beyond herself, changing policies, shaping conversations, and altering lives. Her brief moment of power, now extinguished completely, left her feeling emptiness, shame, and regret. She paused briefly, glancing back at the gleaming corporate logo of Blue Skies Airlines, now a symbol of positive change born from her misguided cruelty. With a deep sigh, she turned away, knowing there was no path back, her future uncertain, her career irrevocably damaged. Underscore 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 impressive underscore 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 underscore. Designers remind us that some things are obvious. Underscore underscore. In stark contrast, standing together proudly beneath that same shining blue skies logo were Richard Bennett and his daughter. It was a symbolic moment, capturing the profound impact of courage, integrity, and decisive action. His young daughter looked up at the familiar logo, a quiet sense of pride reflected in her bright eyes. She stood straighter now, more confident and assured, understanding clearly that from pain and injustice, powerful change and growth could emerge. Beside her, Richard watched silently, deeply proud of the resilience, strength, and courage she displayed throughout the entire ordeal. "Did I help make things better, Dad?" she asked softly, her voice quietly hopeful, eyes searching his face for confirmation. Richard smiled warmly, gently placing an arm around her shoulders, his voice tender yet deeply sincere. "Yes, sweetheart, you did. Sometimes real change happens because one brave person reminds everyone else what's right. And that's exactly what you did. You showed everyone how powerful kindness, courage, and dignity truly are." She smiled happily, eyes shining brighter as his words filled her with renewed pride. She squeezed his hand gently, standing tall and determined, her voice firm and clear as she said, "I'm glad, Dad. I want to always help make the world better, like you." Richard nodded thoughtfully, his gaze gentle yet serious, reflecting on the profound lesson they'd shared together. "You already are, sweetheart. Never forget, standing up for what's right, especially when it's difficult, is how we truly change the world." Behind them, employees and passengers moved through the busy headquarters lobby, each aware of the significance of this quiet moment between father and daughter, the two figures who had reshaped company culture with their unwavering courage and determination. Their shared strength had transformed the company, sparked vital conversations about respect and dignity, and profoundly influenced countless lives beyond their own. The mistake of one individual had indeed changed the world, but it was their collective bravery and compassion that ensured it changed for the better. As Richard and his daughter turned to leave, she cast one final glance back at the blue skies logo, now glowing warmly beneath the sunlight, a powerful emblem of change, hope, and newfound determination. Her heart swelled with quiet pride, understanding that she had become part of something much bigger than herself. Together, they stepped forward into the future, a future brighter, fairer, and more compassionate because of the courage and integrity they'd shown. And in that moment, beneath the clear blue skies, they knew with absolute certainty that kindness, dignity, and respect had triumphed. If you've reached this point in the story, you've witnessed something far more profound than just a tale about an airline incident. This isn't merely about one little girl's unfortunate experience on a flight, nor is it simply about a CAO's authoritative response. It's about something deeper, something universal. The unwavering importance of human dignity, respect, and kindness in a world that often forgets these fundamental truths. What we've explored here today goes far beyond the bounds of fiction. It mirrors experiences we all encounter in our daily lives, situations where we witness injustice, discrimination, or outright cruelty. And the question always remains, how should we respond? The story of Richard Bennett and his young daughter teaches us several invaluable lessons that I encourage each of us to carry forward into our lives. 1. Human. Dignity is non-negotiable. Every human being, no matter their age, background, status, or position, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. This isn't just an idealistic statement, it's a fundamental truth that defines our very humanity. Whether it's a child struggling to lift her suitcase or an elderly person needing assistance, Everyone deserves basic human kindness. When we compromise on this principle, we compromise ourselves and our society. The flight attendant's behavior showed us the damaging consequences when dignity is denied. On the other hand, Richard Bennett's actions showed us the powerful transformation that occurs when someone firmly stands up to protect and reaffirm this value. Let's make this principle our guiding light. Let's remember that the smallest act of kindness or the simplest gesture of empathy can change someone's entire day, or perhaps even their life. 2. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. During the incident aboard the flight, many passengers saw what happened, yet most stayed silent. Initially, only one young woman attempted to intervene, and even then, she was quickly silenced. This moment reminds us that silence in the face of injustice does nothing but empower those who cause harm. Injustice thrives when good people remain silent. Our voices matter, they matter deeply. When we speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels risky, we send a powerful message that cruelty, discrimination, and disrespect are not acceptable. Each time we break the silence, we not only defend the victim, but we affirm our shared humanity. Let this be a reminder to all of us. When we witness unfairness, disrespect, or cruelty, let's not turn away. Let's stand up, lend our voices, and become agents of positive change. 3. True leadership is defined by integrity and courage. Richard Bennett's actions remind us of what authentic leadership looks like. It's not simply about having power, wealth, or authority. It's about having integrity, courage, and the moral strength to act decisively when others hesitate. True leaders never shy away from difficult conversations, nor do they hesitate to hold others accountable, including themselves. Leadership is also about responsibility. Richard recognized immediately that as CEO, he bore ultimate responsibility, not just for his own actions, but for the actions of everyone representing his company. His courage in publicly confronting injustice and implementing swift corrective measures demonstrated exactly what leadership should embody: accountability, clarity, fairness, and compassion. This lesson is valuable not just for those in positions of formal leadership, but for all of us. We each lead in some capacity, at home, at work, in our communities, among our friends. Let's lead by example, embracing courage, integrity, and accountability every day. 4. Change often emerges from challenges and mistakes. Although painful, mistakes can become powerful teachers. The unfortunate event on the Blue Skies flight, while distressing, triggered significant positive changes within the company and inspired thousands to reflect on their own behaviors and attitudes. Life rarely proceeds without setbacks or injustices. Yet each challenge we face presents a choice: succumb to despair or transform pain into purpose. Richard Bennett's experience and his decisive response demonstrates how, with clarity and determination, any negative experience can become a catalyst for meaningful transformation. Let us internalize this lesson. Mistakes, challenges, and even injustices can become powerful opportunities for growth and positive change if we confront them bravely and commit to making things better. 5. Empathy and understanding are the keys to a better world. Throughout the story, empathy played a critical role. Richard Bennett's empathy for his daughter and for every passenger aboard his airline prompted his immediate and powerful action. Conversely, the flight attendant's lack of empathy created the entire crisis. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, the fundamental building block of human connection. When we operate from a place of empathy, we treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves, with compassion, patience, kindness, and respect. It prevents injustice, encourages fairness, and builds bridges rather than walls. Let's commit ourselves anew to developing empathy, to consciously putting ourselves in others' shoes, especially during conflicts or misunderstandings. This simple yet profound shift in perspective can transform our interactions, our relationships, and ultimately, our communities. 6. Everyone can make a difference. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Richard and his daughter's experience is the realization that every single person can make a meaningful difference. You don't need to be a CEO to affect change. You don't need great wealth, power, or status. You only need the courage and willingness to act, to speak up when others are silent, to intervene when injustice occurs, and to defend those who are vulnerable. Change begins with us, with each small decision we make every day. It starts in how we speak to one another, how we treat those who serve us, how we respond to those who are struggling, and how we stand up against mistreatment. Every act, no matter how small, creates ripples of change that spread far beyond what we might imagine. Your next step: join our community. If this story resonated with you, inspired you, or made you reflect deeply, then you understand why stories matter. Here on our channel, we share stories that inspire, empower, and challenge us to grow into better, kinder, stronger people. When you subscribe, you're not just joining a channel, you're joining a community committed to values such as kindness, empathy, fairness, respect, courage, and justice. Each subscriber strengthens our collective voice, helps spread these essential lessons, and becomes part of our ongoing mission to make this world a better place, one story at a time. So please, take a moment right now to hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story that could change your perspective, deepen your understanding, or inspire you to take meaningful action in your life. Final reflections. Before you click away, take just one quiet moment to reflect on what you've experienced here today. Think about how you can carry forward these valuable lessons into your own life. Respect everyone equally, regardless of their position or status. Stand up courageously when you witness injustice. Lead with integrity, no matter where you are or what you're doing. Turn mistakes and challenges into powerful lessons and opportunities for positive change. Embrace empathy in all your interactions. Believe in your ability to make a meaningful difference. Together, these lessons create a foundation for a more compassionate, fair, and connected world. Thank you deeply for spending your valuable time here with us. Your engagement, your attention, and your commitment to positive change mean more than you know. Together we can transform not only our lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Together we can remind the world of the essential truth we explored today. Every single human being deserves respect and dignity, no exceptions. Let's be brave enough to live by this truth every day. Now, please subscribe, join our community, and help us spread these powerful messages far and wide. Your voice matters, your actions matter. Together we are stronger. Together we can make the difference the world desperately needs. Thank you for being here.